Jake Morrison stood at the window of his ship and watched the blue planet grow larger as they approached. 3 years of space travel had led to this moment, and he felt his heart beating faster with each passing minute. This was humanity's first real chance to make friends with an alien race that might actually want to talk instead of fight. The planet Zephyria looked peaceful from space with its white clouds and green lands, but Jake knew the beings living there were nothing like humans. The Valthians were tall and strong, with skin that changed colors based on their feelings. Dr. Lisa Martinez had spent months teaching Jake and his team about their culture, but she kept warning them that much about these aliens remained a mystery. Jake's ship landed in a large field outside the Valthian capital city. The buildings were made of some kind of crystal that caught the sunlight and threw rainbows everywhere. Tall spires reached up toward the sky, and Jake could see figures moving around on platforms high above the ground. Everything looked beautiful, but also very different from anything humans had ever built. A group of Valthian guards came to meet them at the landing site. They wore armor that seemed to be made from the same crystal as their buildings and carried weapons that hummed with energy. Their skin had patterns that glowed with soft blue light, and Jake noticed the patterns were different on each guard. Lisa had told him these markings were very important to Valthian culture, but the exact reasons why were still unclear. The guards led Jake and his small team through the city streets toward the palace. Everywhere they looked, Valthians stopped what they were doing to stare at the humans. Some had markings that turned bright yellow when they saw the visitors, while others shifted to deep purple. Jake tried to remember what Lisa had taught him about the color meanings, but there were so many different shades that he gave up trying to keep track. The palace was the most beautiful building Jake had ever seen. It rose up from the center of the city like a mountain made of pure light. The walls seemed to glow from within, and staircases spiraled around the outside, leading to different levels. Guards stood at every entrance, and their markings all pulsed with the same steady red rhythm. Inside the palace, the halls were wide and tall, with ceilings that disappeared into shadows above their heads. Strange music played from somewhere Jake could not see, and the air smelled like flowers he had never encountered before. The Valthian guards walked quickly, and Jake had to hurry to keep up with their long strides. They entered a huge room where hundreds of Valthians stood in neat rows facing a raised platform at the far end. On the platform sat 3 figures in elaborate robes, and behind them stood a young female Valthian who wore a simple white dress. Her markings were different from all the others Jake had seen because they seemed to contain every color at once, and they moved across her skin like living things. Lisa whispered that the young female must be Princess Kira, who they had come to meet. The princess was supposed to speak for her people in the peace talks that Jake hoped to begin. Everything depended on making a good first impression and following all the proper customs that Lisa had tried to teach them. The ceremony began with long speeches in the Valthian language that Jake could not understand. A device in his ear translated some of the words, but much of what was being said made no sense to him. He heard mentions of honor and ancient ways and something about sacred bonds, but the translator seemed to be having trouble with many of the concepts. When the speeches ended, Princess Kira stepped forward and began walking down from the platform toward where Jake stood. All the other Valthians in the room went completely silent, and their markings shifted to a soft white glow. Jake could tell this was an important moment, but he was not sure exactly what he was supposed to do. Princess Kira stopped in front of Jake and said something in her own language before switching to words he could understand. Her voice was clear and strong, but not unfriendly. She told him that her people were curious about humans and wanted to learn if they could live in peace together. She extended her hand toward him in what seemed like a gesture of greeting. Jake reached out to take her hand, but at that exact moment, another Valthian guard rushed into the room with urgent news about something happening outside the palace. The guard bumped into Jake from behind, and Jake stumbled forward, losing his balance. He put out his hand to steady himself, and his palm pressed against Princess Kira's bare shoulder, where her dress left her skin exposed. The moment Jake's skin touched the glowing markings on her shoulder, everything changed. The markings flared with brilliant white light that filled the entire room and made everyone shield their eyes. Jake felt a strange, tingling sensation run up his arm and through his whole body. When the light faded, he could see that the markings under his hand were now pulsing in perfect time with his heartbeat. Princess. Kira stared at him with wide eyes that seemed to be filled with shock and something that might have been fear. Around the room, the other Valthians began making sounds that the translator told him were gasps of amazement and horror. Many of them dropped to their knees while others backed away as if Jake had done something terrible. An old Valthian in fancy. Robe stepped forward and spoke in a voice that shook with emotion. The translator worked hard to make sense of his words, but Jake understood enough to know that something very serious had just happened. The old Valthian used words like sacred bond and ancient law and forever bound that made Jake's stomach feel sick with worry. Princess Kira had not moved since. Jake touched her, and the markings on her shoulder continued to pulse with the same rhythm as his heart. She looked at him with an expression he could not read, and when she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. She told him that according to the old laws of her people, he had just performed a ritual that would bind their souls together for all time. Jake tried to explain that it was an accident and that he had not meant to touch her markings, but the damage was already done. The Emperor himself came forward and declared that Jake could not leave the planet until they figured out what the bond meant and what should be done about it. In one moment of clumsiness, Jake had gone from being a peaceful diplomat to being a prisoner on an alien world. Jake woke up in a room that was far nicer than any prison cell he had ever imagined. The walls were made of smooth crystal that glowed with soft morning light, and furniture that seemed to be growing rather than built filled the space around him. A window looked out over gardens where strange plants moved in the breeze and made music. When their leaves touched each other, 3 days had passed since the accident in the throne room, and Jake still did not understand what had happened to him. The Valthians treated him well and brought him food that actually tasted good, but they would not let him leave or talk to his team members. Guards stood outside his door at all times, and though they were polite, they made it clear that he was not free to go. The strangest part was the dreams that had started the night. After he touched Princess Kira in his sleep, Jake saw places he had never been and felt emotions that did not seem to belong to him. Sometimes he dreamed of flying through crystal canyons on wings he did not have, and other times he felt overwhelming sadness about things he could not remember when he woke up. Lisa Martinez finally came to visit him on the 4th morning. She looked tired and worried, but also excited in the way she got when she discovered something new about alien biology. Lisa sat down across from Jake at the small table in his room and pulled out a device that would help them talk privately. Without the guards understanding everything they said, Lisa told Jake that she had been working with Valthian scientists to figure out what the markings actually were. What they had learned was both amazing and frightening. The glowing patterns on Valthian skin were not just decorations or signs of social status like humans had thought. They were actually living creatures that had formed a partnership with the Valthian people thousands of years ago. These creatures were called symbiotes, and they helped the Valthians share emotions and thoughts with each other across great distances. When a Valthian felt happy or sad or angry, the symbiotes would change color to show those feelings to others. More importantly, the symbiotes could send those emotions to other Valthians who were far away, creating a network that connected the entire species. What made Jake's situation so unusual was that human brains worked differently from Valthian brains in ways that the symbiotes had never encountered before. When Jake touched Princess Kira's markings, the symbiotes tried to form the same kind of connection they made between Valthians, but human neural patterns were much stronger and more complex than they expected. Lisa explained that Princess Kira was now experiencing human emotions and thoughts that were completely foreign to her people. Valthians were taught from birth to control their feelings and follow strict rules about how to behave, but humans were much more emotional and individual. Through the bond, Princess Kira was learning what it felt like to question authority and think for herself. The effects were not limited to just Princess Kira either. Lisa had discovered that the symbiote network was starting to carry some of Jake's human emotional patterns to other Valthians throughout their society. Young Valthians were beginning to ask questions about their rigid social system, and some were even refusing to follow orders from their superiors for the first time in their history. Jake asked Lisa what this meant for him and whether there was any way to break the bond, but she did not have good answers. The Valthian scientists were just as confused as the human ones, and nobody had ever seen anything like this happen before. Some Valthians thought the bond was a gift from their ancient gods, while others believed it was a dangerous curse that would destroy their civilization. Princess Kira herself came to visit Jake later that same day. She looked different from when he had first seen her in the throne room. Her markings were still pulsing in time with his heartbeat, but now they showed colors that moved and shifted in patterns Jake had never seen on any other Valthian. When she spoke, her voice carried emotions that seemed more human than alien. She told Jake that she could feel his thoughts and emotions even when they were in different parts of the palace. When he felt hungry, she knew it before he did, and when he felt sad about being separated from his team, she felt that sadness too. But more than just sharing his feelings, she was beginning to understand them in ways that confused and frightened her. Princess Kira had never questioned the way her society worked before, but now she found herself wondering why some Valthians were treated as more important than others based on the patterns of their markings. She had never thought about whether the wars her people fought against other species were right or wrong, but now she felt something humans called guilt when she remembered the colonies they had attacked. The princess asked Jake to explain human concepts that had no meaning in Valthian culture. She wanted to understand ideas like individual freedom and personal choice and the right to disagree with those in power. These thoughts were spreading through the symbiote network and causing problems throughout Valthian society that the Emperor did not know how to handle. Jake tried to help her understand, but found it difficult to explain things he had always taken for granted. How do you tell someone who has never experienced it what freedom feels like, or why humans think all people should be treated equally regardless of their social class? The conversation lasted for hours, and by the end of it, Princess Kira looked exhausted but also more alive than when she had arrived. That night, Jake's dreams were different. Instead of seeing random places and feeling strange emotions, he found himself sharing actual memories with Princess Kira. He saw her childhood in the palace where she had been trained to follow rules and never question anything she was taught. He felt her loneliness and her desire to see the world beyond the crystal walls that had always surrounded her. When he woke up, Jake realized that Princess Kira had shared his dreams too. Through their bond, she had experienced his memories of growing up in a human family where children were encouraged to ask questions and make their own choices. She had felt what it was like to have friends who treated you as an equal rather than subjects, who had to show respect based on your birth. Status. Lisa came back the next day with more disturbing news. The symbiote network was spreading Jake's influence faster than anyone had expected. Valthian soldiers were beginning to refuse orders to attack peaceful settlements, and some had even deserted their posts entirely. Scientists who had always focused on making better weapons were now asking questions about the universe just to satisfy their curiosity. Artists were appearing for the first time in Valthian history, creating beautiful things that served no military purpose. The Emperor was becoming increasingly worried about what these changes meant for his empire. If his people stopped following orders and started thinking for themselves, the entire structure of Valthian society might collapse. Some of his advisors were suggesting that Jake should be killed to break the bond before it was too late, but others argued that the bond might be fulfilling an ancient prophecy about their people's destiny. Jake found himself caught between two worlds and responsible for changes he had never intended to cause. He was no longer just a human diplomat trying to make peace with an alien species. He had become the catalyst for a revolution that might transform an entire civilization or destroy it completely. The weight of that responsibility made him feel more alone than he ever had before, even though he was constantly connected to Princess Kira through their mysterious bond. 2 weeks after the bonding ceremony, Jake could feel the changes spreading through the Valthian population like ripples in a pond. Every morning when he woke up, the connection between him and Princess Kira felt stronger and more complex. What had started as a simple sharing of emotions, had grown into something that neither humans nor Valthians fully understood. Princess Kira came to visit Jake every day now, and each time she seemed more different from the formal alien royal he had first met. Her markings showed colors that Valthian scientists said had never been seen before, and her way of speaking had become more direct and emotional. She told Jake that she could now sense not just his feelings but the feelings of thousands of other Valthians who were connected through the symbiote network. The network that had once carried only simple emotions between Valthians was now transmitting complex human concepts that their society had no words for. Ideas about personal freedom and individual worth were spreading from one Valthian to another faster than the government could control. Young soldiers were laying down their weapons and asking why they should fight wars they did not understand. Workers were demanding better treatment and refusing to accept that their low birth status meant they deserved less than others. Jake discovered that he too was changing because of the bond. Through his connection to Princess Kira, he could sense the emotional state of every Valthian on the planet. When large groups of them felt fear or anger or confusion, Jake felt it too as a constant background noise in his mind. Sometimes the sensations were so strong that he had to sit down and wait for them to pass. Lisa Martinez brought Jake reports from around the Valthian Empire that showed how far the changes had spread. On mining worlds where Valthian workers had labored in dangerous conditions for generations, without complaint, there were now strikes and demands for safety improvements. On military bases, soldiers were refusing orders to attack civilian targets, and some entire units had abandoned their posts. The rigid hierarchy that had held Valthian society together for thousands of years was beginning to crumble. The most dramatic changes were happening among young Valthians, who seemed to be most affected by the human emotions flowing through the network. For the first time in their history, some Valthians were creating art that served no military or practical purpose. They painted pictures and wrote poems and made music that expressed feelings their language had no words for. Others were asking questions about the universe that had nothing to do with conquest or expanding the empire. Princes. Kira told Jake about a group of young Valthian scientists who had stopped working on new weapons and started studying the stars, just because they wanted to understand how the universe worked. Their supervisors did not know what to do with research that had no military value, and several scientists had been arrested for wasting resources on useless knowledge. The Emperor called a meeting of his top advisors to decide what should be done about the spreading chaos. Jake was not allowed to attend, but Princess Kira was there, and through their bond he could feel her growing anger as the council discussed different ways to solve the problem. Some advisors wanted to kill Jake immediately, while others suggested isolating him completely from the symbiote network. A few brave voices argued that the changes might be good for their people, but they were quickly shouted down. General Vex was the loudest voice, calling for extreme action. He was an old soldier who had spent his entire life maintaining the strict order that kept Valthian society functioning. Through Princess Kira's emotions, Jake could feel the general's rage at seeing everything he believed in falling apart. Vex argued that the human influence was a disease that would destroy their civilization unless it was cut out completely. Princess Kira surprised everyone, including herself, by standing up to speak against the general. She had never questioned authority before the bonding, but now she found herself defending ideas that would have been unthinkable to her just weeks earlier. She told the council that maybe their people were changing because they had been living in the wrong way for too long. Maybe the rigid rules and endless wars were not the natural state of Valthian society, but just habits that could be changed. The Emperor was shocked to hear his own daughter speaking such thoughts, and for a moment, the entire council sat in stunned silence. General Vex recovered first and accused Princess Kira of being corrupted by human weakness. He said that she was no longer truly Valthian and could not be trusted to think clearly about what was best for their people. That night, Princess Kira came to Jake's room in tears. It was the first time he had seen a Valthian cry, and the sight disturbed him more than he expected. Through their bond, he felt her pain at being rejected by people who had known her since birth and her confusion about who she was becoming. She told him that she no longer felt like she belonged anywhere because she was too human for the Valthians, but too alien to truly understand human ways. Jake tried to comfort her, but he was struggling with his own guilt about the chaos his presence was causing. He had come to Zephyria hoping to build peace between their species, but instead he had started a revolution that might tear Valthian society apart. Thousands of Valthians were suffering because their old certainties were being replaced by questions they did not know how to answer. Lisa brought news that made the situation even more complicated. A human rescue fleet led by Captain Amy Rodriguez was approaching Zephyria with orders to extract Jake and his team by force if necessary. The fleet was still several days away, but when it arrived, the Valthians might see it as an act of war and all hope for peaceful relations would be lost. Jake realized that he had to make a choice that would affect the future of both species. He could try to escape with the rescue fleet and leave the Valthians to deal with the changes he had started without him. Or he could stay and try to help guide the transformation that his presence had begun, even though it meant remaining a prisoner. On an alien world, Princess Kira made the choice easier by telling him something that changed everything. Through the symbiote network, she had been sensing strange signals coming from deep underground beneath the palace. The signals felt ancient and powerful and somehow connected to the bond between her and Jake. She believed that there were secrets hidden beneath their feet that might explain why the bonding had happened and what it was supposed to accomplish. Jake decided that he could not leave until they understood what was happening. The changes spreading through Valthian society were too important to abandon, and he felt responsible for seeing them through to whatever conclusion awaited. When Captain Rodriguez arrived, he would have to find a way to convince her to give him more time to uncover the truth. General Vex was making his own plans during this time. He gathered together the most traditional Valthians who still believed in the old ways and began preparing for a coup that would remove both the Emperor and Jake before their civilization was completely destroyed. Vex was convinced that only extreme action could save his people from the corruption that was spreading through their society. Like a plague, the stage was being set for a confrontation that would determine not just Jake's fate but the future of an entire species. Forces were gathering on all sides, and Jake found himself at the center of events much larger than anything he had ever imagined. When he first accepted the mission to make contact with an alien race, through his bond with Princess Kira, he could feel the tension building throughout the Valthian Empire as their people prepared for changes that would either save them or destroy everything they had ever known. The attack came at dawn when most of the palace was still sleeping. Jake woke to the sound of energy weapons firing and the crystal walls around him shaking from explosions. Through his bond with Princess Kira, he felt her sudden spike of fear and anger as she realized that General Vex had finally made his move against the Emperor and everything the bond represented. Princess Kira burst into Jake's room with several guards who still remained loyal to the royal family. Her markings were flashing with colors Jake had never seen before, and her usual calm demeanor had been replaced by the fierce determination of a warrior. She told Jake that they had to reach the underground chambers beneath the palace before Vex's forces could stop them because the answers they needed were hidden there. The palace had become a battlefield with different groups of Valthians fighting each other in the halls where Jake had first walked as a peaceful diplomat. Some soldiers supported General Vex and his desire to return to the old ways, while others had been changed by the human emotions flowing through the symbiote network and now fought for the right to choose their own destiny. The sound of battle echoed through the crystal corridors as Jake and Princess Kira made their way deeper into the building. Lisa Martinez found them as they reached a hidden staircase that led down into tunnels Jake had not known existed. She was out of breath and her clothes were torn, but she carried a device that she said would help them understand what they found below. Lisa had been working with Valthian scientists who believed that the palace had been built on top of much older structures that predated their current civilization. As they descended into the tunnels, Jake noticed that the walls were covered with symbols that looked nothing like current Valthian writing. The markings seemed to glow with their own inner light, and Princess Kira said that they made her symbiotes react in ways she had never experienced before. The deeper they went, the stronger the sensation became until Jake could feel it too, as a tingling in his skin where he had first touched her sacred markings. The tunnels opened into a vast, underground chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling stretched up into darkness far above their heads, and the walls were covered with intricate carvings that seemed to move in the flickering light. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that looked like it might have been some kind of machine or computer, but built from materials. Jake did not recognize. Princess Kira approached the central structure, and her markings began to pulse in rhythm with lights that were embedded in its surface. When she placed her hand on a section that seemed designed for that purpose, the entire chamber filled with a soft humming sound, and images began to appear in the air around them. The images showed the history of a race that had lived on Zephyria. Long before the Valthians arrived, Dr. Lisa studied the images with growing excitement as her device translated some of the ancient symbols. What they were seeing was the story of a people called the Precursors, who had developed technology that could connect the minds and emotions of different species across vast distances. The symbiotes that lived in Valthian markings were not natural creatures, but artificial life forms created by the Precursors for a specific purpose. The Precursors had discovered that their galaxy was full of intelligent species that fought endless wars because they could not understand each other's emotions and motivations. They developed the symbiote technology as a way to create empathic connections between different races that would allow them to share feelings and thoughts directly. The goal was to build a network of connected species that could work together instead of destroying each other. Jake realized that the Valthians had been chosen as the first test subjects for this technology, but something had gone wrong. The symbiotes had connected the Valthians to each other, but had also made them more aggressive and warlike than the Precursors intended. For thousands of years, the Valthian Empire had conquered other worlds and spread conflict throughout their region of space. The images showed that the Precursors had built safeguards into their system that would activate when the right conditions were met. They needed a species with strong individual creativity and emotional complexity to balance the collective nature of the symbiote network. Humans were exactly what the Precursors had been waiting for, and Jake's accidental bonding with Princess Kira had triggered the activation sequence. Princess Kira stared at the images of her people's true history with a mixture of wonder and horror. Everything she had been taught about Valthian superiority and their natural right to rule over other species was a lie. Her people were not the masters of the symbiotes, but their prisoners, trapped in a cycle of violence by technology they did not understand. The human emotions that were now flowing through their network were not corruption, but a cure for the poison that had infected their society. The revelation changed Princess Kira in ways that went deeper than the emotional bond she shared with Jake. She could feel the truth of what they had discovered resonating through the symbiote network and spreading to Valthians throughout the Empire. The knowledge that their civilization had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding of their own nature was devastating but also liberating. Above them, the battle for the palace continued, but the fighting was beginning to slow as the new information reached both sides through the network. Many of Vex's supporters were laying down their weapons as they realized that the changes they had been fighting against were actually returning their people to what they were supposed to become. Others refused to accept the truth and continued fighting with the desperation of those who see their entire worldview collapsing. Captain Amy Rodriguez chose that moment to arrive with her human rescue fleet. Her ships appeared in the sky above the palace, and her voice came through communication devices demanding Jake's immediate release. She had no way of knowing about the ancient chamber or the revelations happening below ground, and interpreted the fighting as evidence that Jake was in immediate danger. Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Using the communication system in the ancient chamber, he contacted Captain Rodriguez directly and told her not to attempt a rescue. He explained that he was exactly where he needed to be and that removing him now would undo progress that could prevent future wars between their species and many others. Princess Kira supported Jake's decision and used her authority as a member of the royal family to broadcast a message to all Valthian forces telling them to stand down. She explained what they had discovered in the ancient chamber and declared that the time had come for their people to fulfill their true purpose as builders of peace rather than makers of war. General Vex made one last desperate attempt to stop the changes by leading a direct assault on the underground chamber. He and his most loyal followers fought their way through the tunnels, determined to destroy the ancient technology and kill Jake before the transformation of their society could be completed. The final battle took place in the chamber itself with energy weapons. Firing among the ancient carvings and priceless artifacts, Jake found himself fighting alongside Princess Kira and the Valthians who had chosen to embrace change over tradition. The irony was not lost on him that he had come to their world seeking peace and was now engaged in combat to protect the possibility of a better future. Through their bond, he and Princess Kira fought as one mind in two bodies, anticipating each other's moves and covering each other's weaknesses. The battle ended when the ancient chamber's defenses activated in response to the violence within its walls. Beams of energy emerged from the carved walls and disabled the weapons of everyone present without causing permanent harm. In the sudden silence that followed, General Vex finally understood that he was fighting against forces much greater than human influence or royal authority. He was fighting against the intended destiny of his own people, and that was a battle no one could win. 6 months after the revelation in the ancient chamber, Jake stood on a balcony overlooking the Valthian capital and marveled at how much had changed. The city that had once been built for war and conquest now buzzed with the energy of creation and discovery. Where military factories had once produced weapons, there were now workshops where Valthian and human artists worked together to create beauty that neither species could have imagined alone. Princess Kira joined him on the balcony as she did every morning, and Jake felt the familiar warmth of their bond settling into place. The connection between them had stabilized into something deeper than shared emotions or thoughts. They had become partners in the truest sense, working together to guide two species toward a future neither could reach alone. Her markings now showed patterns that included human neural rhythms, creating designs that were completely new to both their peoples. The transformation of Valthian society had not been easy or without cost. Many traditional Valthians had struggled to accept the changes, and some had chosen to leave for distant colonies where they could maintain the old ways. General Vex himself had eventually come to understand the truth about his people's destiny. But the knowledge had broken something in him, and he now spent his days in quiet contemplation of what might have been. Dr. Lisa Martinez had become the head of the new Empathic Research Institute, where human and Valthian scientists work side by side to understand the symbiote technology and improve upon it. They had discovered that willing humans could receive modified symbiotes that allowed them to join the network without losing their individual identity. The process was completely voluntary and created bonds that enhanced rather than replaced natural human emotions. Jake had been one of the first humans to undergo the full bonding process, and the experience had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Through the network, he could sense the emotions and general thoughts of thousands of connected beings, but his human consciousness remained distinct and independent. The sensation was like being part of a vast choir where every voice was unique but together they created harmonies that no single singer could produce. The empathic alliance that Jake and Princess Kira had founded was growing rapidly as more humans and Valthians chose to join the network. They had established a new form of government where decisions were made through consensus, reached by feeling as well as thinking. Disagreements still happened, but they were resolved through understanding, rather than force, because each side could literally feel what the other was experiencing. Captain Amy Rodriguez had initially been skeptical of Jake's decision to stay on Zephyria, but she had eventually become one of the strongest supporters of the alliance. Her military background had given her a unique perspective on how the empathic network could prevent conflicts before they started. She now commanded a joint human-Valthian fleet that served as peacekeepers rather than conquerors. The most exciting development had come when other alien species began approaching the Alliance with requests to learn about the empathic technology. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about a place where former enemies worked together in perfect harmony, and many species wanted to understand how such a thing was possible. Jake and Princess Kira had welcomed these visitors, and several other races had begun experimenting with modified versions of the symbiote network, DR. Lisa's research had revealed that the precursor technology was far more advanced than anyone had initially realized. The symbiotes could be adapted to work with almost any form of intelligent life, and the network could span vast distances using quantum communication methods that human science was only beginning to understand. The galaxy-wide network of connected species that the precursors had envisioned was finally beginning to become reality. Jake often thought about the accident that had started everything and wondered if it had really been an accident at all. The precursor archive suggested that their technology included probability calculation systems that could influence events across thousands of years. Perhaps his stumble in the throne room had been guided by ancient machines working to fulfill their creator's vision of a peaceful galaxy. Princess Kira had changed the most of anyone involved in the transformation. The shy royal, who had once followed orders without question, had become a confident leader who inspired others to reach for possibilities they had never imagined. Her speeches to the Alliance Council moved beings of many different species to tears, as she described her vision of a future where understanding replaced fear and cooperation replaced competition. The bond between Jake and Princess Kira had evolved beyond what either of them had expected when it first formed. They were partners in every sense, working together to build something greater than either of their species could have achieved alone. Their relationship had become a symbol of what was possible when different forms of life chose to connect rather than compete. On quiet evenings, they would walk through the memorial garden that had been built to honor the precursors and their sacrifice for the future of the galaxy. The ancient race had disappeared long ago, but their legacy lived on in every empathic bond and every peaceful resolution of what might once have been a violent conflict. Jake and Princess Kira would stand before the monument and feel the gratitude of thousands of connected beings flowing through the network. The Alliance had established contact with 17 different species and was negotiating with several more. Each new addition to the network brought fresh perspectives and capabilities that benefited everyone involved. Former slave races had been freed through empathic understanding of their suffering, while aggressive species had learned to channel their energies into exploration and creation. Instead of destruction, Jake's role as the first human Valthian ambassador had grown into something much larger than anyone had anticipated. He now served as a coordinator for the entire empathic network, helping to resolve conflicts and guide new species through the bonding process. His unique position as the first accidental bridge between species made him a trusted figure that others could approach with their fears and hopes. Princess Kira had established schools throughout Alliance space where young beings of all species could learn to use their empathic abilities responsibly. The children who grew up connected to the network from an early age showed remarkable abilities to understand and cooperate with others who were completely different from themselves. They were the first generation to truly belong to the galaxy, rather than just their homeworlds. As Jake watched the sunset paint the crystal city in shades of gold and amber, he reflected on how a simple diplomatic mission had become the catalyst